I got really sick, sicker than I had ever been in my life.
Why was I getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, working my butt off, trying to be as fit as I could, and I'm still just drinking until I go to bed?
If you're really paying attention to how it actually makes you feel, you would never do it again. Never feel ridiculous doing something that is really good for you.
Right.
We only have so much willpower. We only have so much energy. Even if we break, not to beat myself up about that. I'm moving in the right direction.
I'm bringing on my friend Phill today, and we're going to talk about fasting, sobriety, mindset, and enjoying those healthy habits. Recently, you haven't drank in, 3 weeks?
Yeah, it's been 3 weeks, I think 3 weeks or a month.
Yes. So this would be your first, going into your first fast, like not drinking.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I haven't thought about that. And I've done 2 fasts without drinking for a while.
Okay.
So
what is your recommendation with fasting after not? So for a lot of us, quitting drinking, for me, I was like, okay, I want to fast. I've heard all these benefits of after you quit drinking, you should probably do this. You know, all the stuff that's all over the internet. But what is your take on that?
I got really sick. And sicker than I had ever been in my life. And literally for about 5 days, I couldn't hold down food or water.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And by the end of it, I literally was like, I am so weak that I can't, because I had been throwing up. I was so weak that I couldn't imagine even getting to the toilet by the end. I was in bed. I was just sitting there and I'm, I felt awful, but at the exact same time, my mind was clearer than it had ever been.
Through being super sick and not eating?
Yeah, well, I think it was just it was kind of like a sign that I didn't think about until far, far after the fact. But literally was having clearer thought about decisions I had made in my life. And it was like they were coming rapid fire. And I'm like, because I actually even felt like, I think I'm dying.
Oh, gosh.
Because I had been so sick, I had gotten everything out of my body, and I think I was on day 5 by the end of not having water or food, which I don't recommend. And obviously, it's obvious why you wouldn't recommend that, but it's I had reached this point where sicker than I had ever been, but got everything out of my body, and then was thinking clear, and it was from that experience, it was right after that, I started making really good decisions, career-wise, decisions I never had allowed myself to make all the way up to that point. And it was 2 years later that I was like, why? All these things kind of shifted in my life. Why? And then I traced it back. I'm like, well, that's when I got sick. Wait a minute. I hadn't had food or water for 5 days. And then it was this, I should try to fast. And I started looking into it a little bit, and I was like, I'm just going to go. As soon as I made that correlation.
That was your wow moment. That
was my wow moment. And I was like, okay, I got to try that again. And just with my own personality, how I've always been wired in my life, if I get excited about something, I have to go at it right then. Literally have had moments in my life where I'm like, I feel like running. I'm going to go run 5 miles. And I'll just up and do it because I know that if I wait even just a little bit, it won't happen. And so with this, I was like, all right, as soon as I had made that connection, I was really looking back through that time of my life. I thought, all right, then I'm going to fast starting right now. And let's try. I think the very first fast that I did after that, which was I think it was a year and a half, 2 years later. As soon as I had thought about it, I'm like, all right, 4 days. I'm just going to go 4 days and see what happens then. Because if I made it 5 days and lived, obviously I wasn't feeling
and with
great.
That water.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to do, safer. I'm going to do water only. Well, I did water and coffee only, which coffee doesn't break a fast if you're doing it black. And so I had done that for 4 days and then started experiencing that same mental clarity. And I'm like, okay, there is something to this. Then I was listening to interviews. There was an interview that Matthew McConaughey did, and he talked about when he was in Dallas Buyers Club, he was kind of prepping his body for that role, which this guy, I haven't watched the movie, but I was listening to the interview, and he's saying, he was playing this character who was very lean. So he fasted And he was saying the same thing, in his McConaughey charm. He's like, oh man, the mental clarity. And as soon as I was like, yes. I was like, that was my experience, and that's why I did it again. And that kind of reaffirmed, like, this isn't just something that was in my mind. Other people who have done this and have gone long stints in their, eating habits, they're reaping these benefits. So then I started like researching it a little bit more and, listen to an audiobook, The Complete Guide to Fasting by Jason Fung.
Okay.
And Chris Hemsworth, who has his show Limitless.
Yes, I got through some of that, and I think I ended on the fasting one.
I've done a lot of the things in my life, I just get through experience or really bad decisions at times, or just like happenstance. And it's funny because a friend of mine, he was like, why is it that you have a story literally for everything? I'm like, because like I didn't get into fasting, or I didn't get into cold exposure, or like some of these things in my life because I wanted to, because, oh, this is fun, or this is cool. It was like, I had a moment, to kind of touch on that note of like cold exposure. This happened in my life because at a very young age, me and my brother, we got really excited. I think it was like December or January. And we were like, we want to go swimming, Mom. We want to go. And she was like, ice was just in our pool.
Oh my gosh.
This is not a good decision. And so we're like, no, we want to do it. We're super excited.
Wait, how old were you?
I think I was 9 or 10, and my younger brother was 8. We both jumped in, and then my younger brother he got scared because of the shock of the cold, and so did I. But he wrapped his arms around my neck, and I started like drowning, and I'm like swimming to the edge of the pool trying to but it was like this moment of shock and exposure at such a young age that I think that had a profound effect. And so then I started seeking cold and had several jobs where I worked like 8 hours in a cooler, and then started getting acclimated to it, and then started associating like, oh, I actually operate better in cold than I do in normal temperatures. Yeah. And so it's like with all these things, it feels like I'm being forced into different situations and having to deal with it. And then I learn after, where I think a lot of people in a very healthy way are researching these things and like, okay, there's some benefit to this. How can I go into this safely? I'm usually finding myself like in a very unwanted situation. But then because I make it out, I realize, oh, wait, there's some benefits to this terrible thing that was very uncomfortable, but there's some benefit to it.
You've embarked on not drinking. You weren't a big drinker prior anyways.
Not really. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like for me, it has always been, well, there was a chunk of time in my early 20s where it got, it got scary. I don't think I've ever been like, I've always been hyper aware of my routines and my habits. So it's like, I'm almost, I think, addicted to trying to find balance. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of like a friend of Stephen King talked about something that Stephen had said. And he's like, I can't control the intensity at which I go at things. I can only control the direction. Oh. And then there was another great quote. Do you know Key and Peele? They're a comedic group. And okay. Keegan-Michael Key, he had said in an interview, he's like, I realize I have a very addictive personality, so I might as well be addicted to broccoli. So like, that's why he decided to choose comedy, because he was like, whatever I do, he's like, I want to do it a million times, and I want to like, mm-hmm. And he's like, and it's annoying to some people. Yeah. He's like, so that's why I chose comedy, is because I could pour myself into it. And hopefully that would give back to people, where they're like, oh, he's being silly. And they don't recognize that he had done that a million times to get it perfect. But it's giving, something back. So in that same vein, it's like these things, I try to pay attention to like what is good for me and what is bad for me. And anything that is like alcohol, it's a very dangerous thing for a person that is highly addictive. So my focus, even if I'm drinking, I'm constantly in the back of my mind thinking, all right, you've done this for X amount of time, so now we're going to have to go the other way. Yeah. And even if I go intense tonight and like really enjoy, and it's never because I'm never consistent with that habit, I'll go, like intense might be 4 or 5 drinks. And I know that's nothing to sneeze at, but at the exact same time, then I will know like there's a part of me that's saying like, all right, now you're going to have to do something that's really healthy for your body on that same level, if not more.
So like heavy drinking into fasting.
Yeah. And that's kind of and that's how, it's been. But really, if I looked at the course of my life, what I'm trying to also do from like a larger scale is look at it and say, what habits am I weakening? And so how much was I drinking during this period of my life? And I'm out of that environment that was like making it easier. I was bartending, bar backing. I was around it all the time and it became normal. And I was very aware that I'm like, oh, this is becoming normal. It doesn't even feel bad. Like I'm doing anything bad. And then that scared me. And I'm like, okay, well then how do I get out of this environment and get myself in an environment where that's not as normal? And then you do that. And that's one step in the right direction. But then how do I even increase that? And that's why like literally being here, having this conversation with you where you're making that journey, I'm like,
yes,
it seriously does. I'm like, wow. Like if you look at it from that big perspective, that is awesome that we're moving in the right direction. We're having good conversations that are helping us as well.
And you brought it like habit. Like a lot of us, drinking was a habit. We were in the groups where drinking was, and now it's trying to come out of that box. What can you give other people? Like what type of takeaway can you give other people to breaking the habit pretty much?
I would say like, I've heard Kristen say it, my wife say it several times, like give yourself grace. And it's like, as you are, don't look at it necessarily, even if you're an addictive personality, which I am. And I have a friend who's like, oh, if I even do that once, then I'll be off the rails. And I've found that with my own personality as well. And how I look at it is you're weakening habits or you're strengthening them. So as you're doing that, be aware of, all right, am I doing this? Because if I'm doing it, then I am, but I want to pay attention to how often. And so if I'm putting my intense focus on balance and then also on really looking at it, the visual analogy or metaphor that I like to use just being around like fitness equipment is like a flywheel. It's like if you roll something and then you hear that whee, it has momentum, right?
Right.
So like I try to think of things like that where it's like on this habit, if I do it once, it's going to go whee and it's going to have a little bit of momentum. But if I do something that counteracts that and I really crank on that, that's giving more momentum in the opposite direction. So as I'm doing something, I'll know like, all right, I'm trying to balance this out, but ultimately like the larger goal is to get rid of it altogether. But every single time that, I'm doing that, I'm trying to pay attention to like, all right, have I given it more distance? And if I have, and I've really pushed myself, because we only have so much willpower, we only have so much energy. And it's like, even if we break, not to beat myself up about that, but to like look back and say, I went, how many ever days or how many ever years, and I'm moving in the right direction. So then I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to push my willpower and my strength even further the next time. And that's going to weaken it to the point where like one day I'll just be looking back and I'm like, it's not even there anymore.
Right.
But I think it's more popular in our culture to like cold turkey and never again. And sometimes that's just not like possible. Or sometimes you reach that point where you break. That's fine. Start back up right away and prove to yourself that you can go even further the next time.
And I know some people don't have like the support from like family and friends, but I think putting yourself in like-minded people.
Yes.
I mean, the four of us have always been very like-minded, but so for people like me and you, like that have always been into health and fitness, and then we continue with that like bad habit of drinking.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'll just, not that you fasted to get rid of the alcohol, but, and it's like, well, you're putting yourself through, 3 to 7 days without eating, but then, shortly after you're going to start drinking again. Like, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, now that I look back, I'm like, why was I getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, working my butt off, trying to be as fit as I could, and I'm still just drinking until I go to bed?
Exactly. But that's also a great point, is that when you start one habit that's really good for you, you built up so much time where you were doing that thing that was really good for you in your life. Did that other habit, like, it really couldn't last.
Yeah.
It eventually would get to a point where it's like, this isn't in line with this other habit that I've built stronger. And that's also another, it's like, start chaining some of these good habits together, and those gain strength. And even just talking about it, that's something that's like, I've had the thought, like, my brothers and I, we've always talked. We've always been very open. And I really connect with other people that love having good, deep conversations. But I also notice, I'm like, I've had conversations that haven't really yielded good results, and they've been fun or whatever, entertaining for the moment, but I'm like, they're of low quality. And then you start having really good conversations about things that are healthy for you. And you're like, wow, that felt better. And when you do that, and I work in a workplace where I have these kinds of conversations with my coworkers, and I'm like, I freaking love this. And I try to look at things from that, like, pulled back perspective of, how much time am I spending talking about things that are really good, that I'm actually doing? And that time could be wasted, like, having terrible thoughts. And I think that's something that also in our culture, and it's rampant. And I will be the first to admit that, like, if I'm not kind of focusing my mind and having good conversations like this, it will revert to almost like this editing mode where it's saying, like, oh, this is what you could work on, or this is where you're falling short, and this is what I need to, and it gets into that. So I've really tried to fill my time with, like, good conversations about things that I'm like, this is going to help me, because, again, it's that addictive nature where my mind, if left to its own devices, it will start, like, picking apart things on myself and my life. And it's like, I don't want to be there. So more of this is, I think recommended to anybody.
And for me, if I have to have the accountability. And so Jonathan quit in May, and I was like, that's lame. And so it was like a couple months later, then we started 75 Hard, and he's trying to get you to do 75 Hard.
I need to do it. And I love that we're recording, because, like, you bringing up the accountability piece, he's brought it up so many times that every single time there is something inside me. It's like, okay.
I didn't want to quit drinking, so that's why I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And now look.
Yeah. And that's also, it's like, when I heard that you guys both did it, and he had talked about it for a little bit before doing it, and it's like, all right, they're doing it. They're making it possible. And this kind of also ties in with, like, when I was really young, my older brother, he had decided that he was going to give up, and it sounds ridiculous, but he was giving up chocolate. He was overweight, and he had made this up in his mind. He didn't tell anybody, and literally had this transformative moment where I think he was in junior high, and we went to Hawaii, and he always wore baggy clothes, and we get out on the beach, and I was like, what the? And I looked at him, and right before my eyes, he had proven to me that we can change.
Yeah.
And so, again, having examples of people that we know and make something possible, having you guys do really hard things, I'm like, oh, it's possible. Yeah. So then it makes it easier for us to believe that we can do it. Because oftentimes, if you're not around the right people, if you don't see the right examples, you're like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. But it's just not possible.
You definitely have to put yourself with like-minded people, or you're not going to go anywhere.
Right.
You're not going to get out of your stagnant habits, or if you just want to maintain, that's cool. But if you want to be better, then you have to, put yourself with aspiring people.
Yeah. So what's been your experience after quitting and, like, growing, like, seeing this thing really blow up and having people connect?
Well, it's gotten me onto fasting, and I plan on doing, like, intermittent fasting. I think I'm going to venture into it at the beginning of the year. But I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, people message me all the time, you've changed my life. I quit drinking because of you. I'm like, me? Like, little old Megan. Like, people are quitting drinking because of videos that I've put out, and never in my life did I think that I would be one to inspire. But it's been definitely a roller coaster, and you definitely notice some friends definitely are near and far now because, you know, that was what you did with some friends.
Yeah.
And so I think getting over that part and then putting myself like in situations that I know that I will not be comfortable with, I try to stay away from.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just been, somebody brought up a point. They're like, I'm not restricting myself from drinking. I will give myself permission to drink. It was a comment. I don't have my computer. I wish I would have saved it. But I was like, oh, that was a really good point. Like, he's not like, he's not taking, what was it? It was, he's choosing not to drink.
Yeah.
He's not like saying he can't drink, but he's choosing not to drink. So it's more empowering
Yeah.
saying like, I'm not drinking. I'm like, wow. I mean, that really, like, we can drink, but we are just choosing not to drink.
Yeah. And it's little things like that that have so much power that I've found where I'm like, it's how you look at it. Because him saying that to me, again, it strengthens the idea that that's a choice that you're making.
Yeah.
And even if one day you get like weak and you make that choice, you make a different choice, that very next day you get to make a choice again.
Yep.
Instead of saying, this is what I am. Because I think oftentimes it's like when we fail at anything, fail at learning this or fail at doing this, we attach our identity to that outcome, which is not healthy, which everyone does. And then what do? We start thinking about that and we start dwelling on that. And then the mind, the body, and everything in your life will go wherever your mind goes. So making that little like decision to understand, oh, it's just a choice. That was a bad choice. I'm not going to spend another moment dwelling or beating myself up. I'm going to now know that I'm going to make the choice to think of myself this way. And if I was going to make the mistake of attaching my identity to a person who drinks and that would have been the bad way, well, then you can just reverse engineer that and say, now my identity is I'm not a person who drinks. I was the
drinker.
I was the drinker, exactly. And I love that. And it's like when you really start thinking of yourself in that way, that's who I was and that's not who I am. And you start making that choice, you start having better conversations, you really start thinking about it. And then those habits start feeding and rewarding a life that becomes far better for you.
And then you see your friends start trickling in behind you, following your footsteps, which is, I mean, that's absolutely amazing. I mean, a handful of our people have been like, oh, I quit drinking. I haven't drank for a month or, it's really cool. And I mean, because we used to come to your house and I'd bring a bottle of wine. Kristen would make dinner and I'd bring the wine. But now I just bring the sparkling water.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's like, and again, that's also another piece that I really enjoy about that is that you have people that are like, maybe on the fence or you feel like from my perspective, like I don't associate myself with being a person who has to have it.
Yeah.
That's almost scarier because then you're a little bit more nonchalant. You don't feel like this thing has a power over me when it actually does.
Yeah.
And when I really started looking, I'm like, I was already reaching a point where like even having a beer or two, my stomach didn't feel good. I'm getting a little bit older and all these things. And I'm like, why am I even doing this? So this, to me, I just see this as like, oh, this is a huge opportunity to take what they've done, be inspired by that and just say, okay, all right.
And you and Kristen both haven't drank for a while.
Yeah, it's been, she's
never been a big drinker. I'm like 5 to her 1, but.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also the thing is that it's like, but that still, even though we were not like big drinkers, we have gone through times where we've had more.
COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, the C word.
Yeah.
I remember because she was off, everybody was off work. Like we'd be at each other's house. We'd be buzzed by like 2:00 and we were potty training. Our kids are the exact same age. So we got to go through it right next door with each other. And then I think that's when like that roller coaster really started going up with drinking. And then, I don't know, it was crazy. So with the mindset of back to like the mindset, choosing to fast and choosing to not drink, I feel like if people can quit drinking, people can fast for 24 to 48 hours.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I think not drinking, if you've developed that as a habit, I think not eating is actually an easier habit to break. I like really looking at when we did a year without drinking, even just in the beginning of that, I think that was harder for me, like saying, oh, I'm not going to eat. I think there were times in my life I was naturally intermittent fasting and just wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
I used to get teased when I worked in a tire shop. There were like a group of guys that are like, we never see you eat. And I was like, yeah, I don't bring anything in. They're like, it's been 9 hours that we've had. And I'm like, and that kind of like, it ties in with the idea of like, sometimes we're doing things better when we're just not aware of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't necessarily feel like I need to eat here. So I would go home and I'd have dinner and then I'd, work out and then I would go to bed. And when I was in that rhythm, I was like, I was in the best shape of my life, but it wasn't something that I was like consciously doing. I was literally just, how do I feel? And tapping more into that. So I think really paying attention to how your body feels and listening to that, I think that's the actual habit that if I can tap back into that more often, rather than trying to like use willpower to like say, oh, I'm going to do this thing. Cause like I do that too, but that only has so much weight. But if I'm like really just focusing on what feels right and what feels good, that's far easier. And I think it's more sustainable.
Yeah. So speaking of fasting, you are finishing up one now?
Yes, I am. My stomach is literally growling as I'm sitting here.
How long?
This is a 3-dayer.
3-day.
Yeah. And I was actually going to do 4 days. And then as soon as, this is a big piece of like how I go into everything. I try as best I can to listen to my body.
Yeah.
And as I've started fasting, I really look at it almost like waves in an ocean where I'm paying attention to like, when do I feel mentally strong? When does it feel almost like my body's asking for it? And that's been my experience with everything, like similar to when I very first started lifting weights way, way, way back. And I was also, I had a very physical job for the past 20, 25 years or different jobs that were all physical. And it's like, I started paying attention to really like, how does my body feel? And sometimes it might be ridiculous. Kristen, she's like, it's funny that you do this, but at the exact same time, I see why. Like you're really paying attention because I will literally like we'll be doing something and I'll drop and like start doing push-ups or something because it's almost like my body starts calling to it.
Yeah.
And the more you start like paying attention to those signs, you answer that call and then it's like, oh, I feel better. Like it lifts my mood. And if I don't do those things, then I don't feel as good. So
do you work out when you're fasting?
I have, and I have made that mistake. I think if you're going to do it, my one recommendation is do not work out really hard, even 2 days before, because I've done that and I've felt like mentally strong. Like, okay, I've got 3-4 days and got like a day and a half in. And I'm like, I am starving because it's almost like a flywheel. Like your body just gets like in that mode of consuming food and wanting calories. And if you're burning all of that, then it's going to say, hey,
you're extra
hungry. Bud, yeah, where are you at? And it becomes infinitely more difficult. So like as soon as we started talking about this, I'm like, oh, I'll fast. Then it was like I had a little bit of time to prep. And I thought like while we were talking, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. But then it was like that following day, I'm like, no, I need one more day to mentally prep for this because I had already done like a workout and I could feel, I'm like, I'm going to stop.
And you just did one you did a fast last month too. How long was that one?
It was 3 days.
3 days. Is that like your typical fast?
Now I'm finding 3 to 4 days is like my sweet spot. If I do anything more than that, I've had like little signs. I'm like, I don't think this is good. Mm-hmm. At least that's for me, just kind of listening to my own body, and everyone has to do their own, like, that's my advice to anybody is be your own scientist and like get as much information on a topic. But I've always kind of like fallen into these things, not through choice, but maybe because of a bad decision or a bad experience. But then I try to look at everything like, well, what was the good thing that came from that? And how can I apply that in my life in a way that's a little bit safer? So I usually end up doing research only after the fact. But I would recommend that The Complete Guide to Fasting. That was an amazing book I was listening to it on Audible as I was fasting, and it was like super motivating. And they talked about the process of autophagy.
Yes.
So this is cool because if you're doing it safely, I've reached it on like the end of day 2, day 3, day 4. It literally starts compounding where your body, I learned, the very first time I experienced it, I was like, what is it? I feel euphoric.
The autophagy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I haven't felt it as strong as I did the very first time I felt it and really was aware of it. I did a 7-day fast, and it was on like day 4. I'm like, I am buzzing right now. Like I literally feel like I'm kind of drunk. I'm happy. I'm fully present. I remember I was walking with Kristen, my wife, and my children, and we're like going around the block, and I was like, just present and feeling really warm and comfortable, and just, wow, this is beautiful. And like experiencing that moment, I think on the highest level that I think I can experience anything. And so again, like those little things, I'm like, well, it's not easy. It's very challenging to get to this moment in life. You have to kind of overcome your habits or your natural like impulses, but there are these like beautiful rewards within it that until you experience it, it's like, oh, I can never do that. And I hear that, from a lot of people, and they're like,
that was me.
Yeah. And I remember, and that's why I'm like, I was so stoked when I heard that you
Kristen, I'd be like, Phil's fasting again? What is he doing? Like, how do you put yourself through that? And then I did it, and I was like, oh, I only did 36 hours ish, but it was good. I woke up that morning and I was like, wow, I feel different. It was a different type of energy. I wish we would have kept going another day.
That also kind of ties into, it's like, as soon as I learned about the process of autophagy and the example, I believe it's in the Complete Guide to Fasting that he used was, imagine your cells are like, they're like passengers that are getting on the subway.
Yeah.
And your entire life, if you're not going long enough where you are taking a chunk of time where you're not putting something in, those passengers never get off the bus. So there are people that are waiting at the bus station, new cells, that can't get on. And the old cells stay on the bus over and over again. So what I equated, as soon as I heard that, and then he's like, this process is called autophagy, I was like,
Nice.
So that was the sensation that most people feel. And a friend of mine, Bobby, who she talked about fasting, she's like, the very first time I did it, I reached these feelings of euphoria. And I was like, yes, that's it.
Okay.
That's what I felt. And then this guy described it in such a way that I understood. I'm like, oh, my body was finally getting rid of old cells that have probably been around for who knows how long.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you get rid of them, new cells get on the bus. And you're like, well, that's different.
Interesting.
Wow.
Because some people say it takes at least 48 hours. Again, the internet, like everybody has their own opinion. Have you noticed autophagy earlier?
No. I want to say the earliest I've experienced it is on day 2. And on that specific note, day 2 is really hard. And it doesn't matter. Like a lot of people, I can't remember who said it, if it was Peter Attia, but he's like, oh, if you can go 2 days, you can go 7 days, or you can go 14 days. And it's so true, because the longer you do it, the irony is like, I really don't want to go back. Like if you are really tapping in and paying attention to how you feel, you feel better, because putting stuff in, oddly enough, it's such a habit that we're not even paying attention to how that makes us feel. And it's like, obviously with alcohol and all these different things, if you go a certain amount of time and then you don't, and then you do and you break that. I literally had, like, we did a full year of paleo, didn't drink at all. And then it was Christmas time. I can't remember, 2016 or something like that, where we broke and I was like, I'm going to have a beer. I had a beer and my stomach sounded like old creaky boards and pirate ship. It was so loud. And I was just, okay, that's a sign that your body doesn't like it.
Yeah.
But then you get like a little, like you feel relaxed or whatever. But if you're really paying attention to how it actually makes you feel, you would never do it again.
Yeah.
And there are so many other healthier options to that same feeling, but they're more challenging. And like that's been a pattern that I've noticed with a lot of these things. It's like there's an upfront price of like willpower and like getting through some of these things. But as soon as you break through them, then you get these like beautiful rewards. And those rewards start feeding themselves. And, you know, I've felt at times, like when I talk about some of this stuff, people are like, because they don't have the experience with it, are you nuts? And I'm like, I think depending on the perspective, it's like, yeah, it's not normal, but I'm enjoying right now because it feels like some of the things that I've been into for a while now, they're starting to become more mainstream. And I'm like, good. Okay. Other people are like getting into this and paying attention to it. And it's also nice to like have more of a community around some of these ideas,
Definitely.
right?
There's so many benefits to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You bringing that up also makes me kind of want to bring up the fact that growing up, I always had and still do have a very sensitive stomach. So I think I've grown accustomed to that feeling of like not feeling well in my stomach, and people that maybe don't have as sensitive of a stomach, that could be one of those barriers that they're going to have to get through. But because I'm like, 40 plus years experience of feeling like not really great in my stomach, that was never a barrier.
Yeah.
As I started like experimenting with this, and my wife, she's always brought up, she's like, I can't do that because I feel like I'm going to throw up. And I'm like, well, why is that stopping you?
Well, we got to get her to drink more water.
Yeah. Yes.
Kristen, we love you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but that's something for any audience member, or listener to think about, is that it's like you will hit waves of nausea. By most people's experience, I don't even notice those waves often. Hunger waves, I notice.
So how do you get pushed through that? Like,
I know that during dinner time, what I've experienced from about anywhere from like 5:30 to 8 is the hardest time.
Really?
Every single day that you fast.
Well, especially when Kristen's making
oh my gosh.
In-N-Out burgers.
Yeah, but like you smell the food, and by what I've experienced is like by day 2 or 3, your sense of smell goes through the roof. I've literally never felt like I've had like the greatest sense of smell, but day 2 or 3, I'm like, oh man, someone's cooking steak and the seasoning. Oh,
from like
pepper.
2 blocks away.
Yeah. Yeah. And like ordinary seasoning sounds good. Oh, salt and pepper, but it's like, that is one thing that goes through the roof.
And you break your fast, I think you mentioned, with bone broth.
Yeah,
Typically.
I think, and that was something that was recommended after I had already done it several times. Not breaking the fast with bone broth, but I had already had experience with fasting and did not have good experiences. Had broken it completely wrong, and then heard about bone broth. And the very first time I broke a fast with bone broth, oh my God, it was amazing. And it was like right after Thanksgiving. I think this was last year when I very first tried it. And I broke with actual bone broth, like not like the store-bought stuff, but like really from the turkey. Mm-hmm. And Kristen was like, well, I'm just going to get rid of this. Do you want to keep? I was like, no, you keep that around. I heated it up. That was the best thing I've ever had in my life at that. I mean, the flavor and like how your body just instantly is like, oh, you are putting everything that we need in.
Yeah.
And wow. But to that point, the opposite of that, because I like to do everything the wrong way the very first time, when I did my first intentional 4-day fast, I broke with a cinnamon roll.
I think you mentioned that.
And the roof of my mouth went numb.
Interesting.
And something in there, my body was saying like, nope, don't do that ever, you know? But again, it's like when we do these things, we restrict something in our normal routine and other things become hyper aware.
So we've brought up the restriction. So a lot of people think that they can just not eat for 22 hours and then eat whatever they want in that, 2 hours or whatever, 16, 8, you have to go into this eating healthy, within balance. And so it just goes to show that the cinnamon roll was not the best choice versus the bone broth.
Yeah.
It made you feel so much better. And I guess, in your opinion, how, people just are going to take advantage of not eating and thinking that they can eat whatever they want.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I like to think of everything as like balance as I'm improving. Mm-hmm. And so if the ultimate goal is to get to a point where you're not only like doing physical activity, because like to the same degree that you were equating, you were always into fitness but you were drinking, and then drinking eventually got to a point where you couldn't do it anymore. You're weakening that. Similar to me, like I've never really been all that great with my diet. I've just done so much physical work that people are like, oh, you must eat really good. And I'm like, no, actually, I've never really needed to, because I had been burning way more calories than I should be per day. But now I'm like, I'm not doing as much physical activity. So then the goal is, well, if I'm not going to be doing as much physical activity as I have been, then I need to improve my diet. And so then I do fasting and I become hyper aware of all these things that I'm like, all right, that needs to be removed. But how do I do that in a way that I'll be successful and I can, sustain that?
Yeah. I believe in an 80-20 rule. I'm not strict with my diet. So after I broke my fast, I broke it healthy.
Yeah.
But then that day we went to lunch and had those 10-barrel nachos, the potato nachos with the queso and steak on it, and half of a burger.
Yeah.
But I was surprised I didn't feel like crap afterwards.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was actually, it kind of made me tired, but that's what I guess comfort food does. And then I'm surprised I survived. I was like, oh, well, not too bad. That wasn't bad.
That's a great point, though. Like what I've noticed doing this, and then, with a lot of these things, like, oh, if I have a sandwich at this time, I can't help but have to take a nap. Mm-hmm. And the image of like a boa constrictor digesting a deer, it's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. That's the only function its body can do. Again, kind of ties into, you start to realize that when you're on a fast, when you're awake, you're wide awake. It's almost like your mind is saying like, all right, take down whatever food.
Yeah.
You like get to that.
Being a man, because somebody asked me how Jonathan and I did it, like how he overcame it versus me overcoming it. And Jonathan has a military background, so he's starved before. But like being a man, like how do you push through? Because your hunger is probably different than
Yeah. I try to avoid like dinner time. That's when I know I'm going to be weakest. I let Kristen know, let my wife know that I'm not going to be eating. So then hopefully she doesn't take it personal when I'm not in the kitchen or near it. Last night, I made the mistake of like, I was on the couch and I started getting tired. And that's also another piece of it, is that it's like your energy level will go down. And so that's also why I don't recommend working out, because any one thing that can like, weaken your energy levels, you have to think about. So
I feel like you wouldn't want to weaken yourself any more than you're already weak in that moment, because then that can probably cause other issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was sitting on the couch and then she started cooking and I'm like, oh, I'm tired, but I'm smelling this food. I'm like, on this particular fast last night was definitely like, that was the challenge. But luckily I was so tired. I was just like, that smells amazing, but I literally don't have the energy. I'm just going to fall asleep on the couch. But if I would have, thought about that before, I would have just gone upstairs or like gone out for a walk. And that's also another recommendation that I would say is like, if you are going to do this and set out to do this, I would highly, highly recommend journaling the process.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And then also setting up activities to keep you as busy as possible. I guarantee you are going to be so much more effective doing those things than you've ever been, if it's not like extremely strenuous.
I took my kids to the park, and I don't take my kids to the park. But I was like, okay, I got to stay busy.
Yeah.
Brought coffee and water, and we stayed there for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
And away from food.
Yeah. I like long, just easy walks are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I won't recommend, and I don't know if this is just particular to me, but I did light yard work on one of my fasts and almost passed out.
Oh.
Just from getting up and down. I wasn't doing any like heavy lifting, but I was just pulling weeds.
In the heat?
It wasn't very hot,
Okay.
but it was just like me getting up and down. And I literally, there were like a couple of times where I was almost having fun with it, where I'm like, oh, like I'm getting a little woozy, you know? But yeah, I don't recommend doing anything strenuous at all.
So that's during like an extended fast versus like intermittent fasting. Obviously, people are going to work out during their intermittent fast periods, or not restricting themselves on strenuous working out. But yeah, I agree with, I would not have fared well if I was exercising.
Yeah. By day 3 or 4, I don't recommend any kind of strenuous activity. And again, like going into it, I wouldn't even recommend working out like 2 or 3 days before if you're going to be doing long chunks. But like my experience with intermittent fasting is completely different. I'm like, oh, you can work out, and I think it's perfectly fine.
I guess I don't think I worked out before I did the fast last time, so it was kind of easier because I was like, okay, Phil's fasting this week, maybe I should fast. But then I started getting consistent with working out again, and I would be starving, and I was like, okay. So that is a good tip.
Yeah.
Of not working out a couple days before, or at least strenuously.
Yeah. Yeah. What I truly feel grateful for are moments like this where it's like, it's easier, in my opinion, to jump into something and say, I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't want to let anybody down.
Yeah.
And it really is like, that has more weight than I can let myself down, which sucks.
Yeah.
You know, it sucks. I think that I'm not alone in this, and it's like, I can let myself down. You know, I've let myself down before, but I can't let down like other people that are really striving for something.
Yeah.
So I really do appreciate like organically jumping into this. Oh, I didn't even know. Well, that's exactly how like my personality works, where it's like that immediate, like, all right,
There's your accountability.
boom. Okay.
See, me, if I put it out there to the world, I will not fail because I'm not failing myself. I'm failing everybody else is watching.
Yeah.
And which pushes me to be better and continuing being better. And I don't know, just opens up a whole different door.
Yeah.
But failing yourself is one thing, but failing like thousands of people watching you is a whole different thing.
Yeah, it is. And it reminds me of like David Goggins. He talks about this where he's like, become your own accountability partner. And I think that is huge. But I think, you know, like if you can't make that step, because that to me is like, that's a harder step. If you really start getting a group of people to be accountable, like make you accountable to something.
Which is why 75 hard was, I think, doable. Because if it was just me doing it, I would have failed 3 days into it.
Yeah.
But since there was a group of us doing it, I was like, I'm not going to be the first to fail.
Yeah.
Heck no.
Right.
And then I was like, okay, well, now I can't fail at all because, I'm the health person of the 8 of us.
Yeah.
Like, if I fail, then what does that look like?
Yeah.
So, and, everybody was like, you're going to fail because of alcohol. No, I was going to fail because I didn't read my 10 pages. Like, I was like, I'm not failing because of alcohol. Like, heck no. I'm not going to let people, know that's the reason. It just was like, if that's the one reason everybody thinks I'm going to fail, I'm not failing because of alcohol.
Yeah.
I'll fail because I ate chocolate or I didn't take my picture or something else besides alcohol.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think you should do 75 hard with us come summertime.
Okay. All right. And I'm saying yes to that too.
Okay. I think the trick is early summer, midsummer, because it's easier to get outside and be with your family.
Yeah.
Like you can go on family walks and everybody takes 75 hard their own way. But I think that if you do it in the right way, it's achievable.
Yeah.
as long as you're doing it the right way, you don't need to like overexert yourself. I mean, don't underexert yourself, but I mean, just doing it. I mean,
It sounds so intense. I've done some challenges. I will be the first to admit this one is a little terrifying to me.
but you got all the, I mean, you have all the basics.
All right.
I mean,
I know I can do it. Everyone knows they can do anything, but at the same time, it's like when you really go at something, I really do admire you guys for doing it. That's
It's
not
life-changing.
it's not an easy. When Jonathan brought it up first, I was like, oh my God.
yeah,
Like,
he's been after you. He's been after one of his other
Yeah.
friends and like Josh and like everybody. And everybody says no or they, last a week. And so I think doing it together was easier. But I mean, well,
All right.
yeah.
Okay.
So, can you give the audience maybe some key takeaways on the habit, like breaking the habits, making your like body and mind just feel better, like through sobriety or fasting?
Yeah. Obviously, the habit feeds itself. And I would say, to reiterate the point of not beating yourself up if it's a challenge, and really document your own journey, and then really give yourself praise and understand when you have achieved something, and really having markers that you can weigh your good habits toward or against, and look at it like, I made it. Even if it's 2 days or 3 days doing something that's really positive for you, and rewarding yourself every day at the end of the day of like, this went well. Mm-hmm. That was a huge thing for me, of like documenting and writing down and looking at the things that went well that I achieved in just one day. Because oftentimes we're saying, oh, we can't do that for that long. And we're so hyper focused on an extreme goal. And when we don't reach that, then we get into the bad habits again. We say, oh, it's done. It's not done. If you did it and you achieved it in one day, you can do it the next day. But just focus on one step at a time, this moment, and what you did today.
And one step at a time is big.
Yeah.
Every day.
On that note, I think like motivation in and of itself is nothing. And what I like to do is that as soon as I'm inspired, I act on it as rapidly as I possibly can. And I truly believe that is something that has been a superpower, and to the point where I'm not afraid to be embarrassed of, like, if I feel like right now I'm inspired to go run, or I'm inspired to maybe even just attempt a few push-ups. Like if you're at that point where you're like, I want to do something healthy, but I feel ridiculous doing this thing. My own personal belief is never feel ridiculous doing something that is really good for you.
Right.
Years ago, I had decided that I wanted to train for a marathon. And this was after my wife had said, when I turned 30, I want to run a half marathon. I never wanted to run that kind of a distance because I lean out way too quick. And I have always been like, I don't want to be a stick because I will go that way real quick, which a lot of people are like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, no, as a man, you want to be muscular, you want to be in shape. And I would rather err on the side of being a little bit bigger than way too lean. In my entire life, it's like my body wanted to go way too lean. So as soon as Kristen was like, I want to run a half marathon, I'm like, I don't really want to do this. But we started doing it, and we started training for it, and we did it. And what I found was, like, my body instantly was like, okay, we're getting lean. And I was like, oh, I don't look as good. But as soon as I crossed the finish line and I did that half marathon, the first thing I said was, I'm never doing a full marathon. That night, because of how my mind works, it's like, oh, gonna go halfway, huh? And I was like, oh, you son of... And that did not sit well. And so I was like, all right, well, I don't want to stay in this shape longer than I have to. So I'm going to go as quickly as possible into that marathon. The next week, I set out to do a full marathon. I only made it 18 miles and I collapsed on someone's driveway. Had to call my brother to pick me up. And he's like, what are you doing?
Oh gosh.
And I was like, well, I got to do a marathon now. And he's like, oh God, here we go. And so I started training for a half or for a full marathon. And on a different run, I once again got up to 18 miles and my body was doing, I was like, oh, here we go. So much lactic acid in my body. I'm standing on my feet, but my calves pull and my hamstrings pull at the same time. I have no control over it. My body seizes up.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm walking across it was a crosswalk leading toward a chevron. I collapse in the bushes. And now, mind you, I don't have a shirt on and I'm in like running shorts and my entire body seizes up backwards. So like I'm in a reverse, I'm like a C. And my legs have so much lactic acid that they're going like this and I'm shaking and I'm in this bush in front of a chevron. And I hear this guy, he's at the, like he had pulled up, his car had pulled up to this light. And he goes, hey, buddy, are you on drugs? And I'm like, no. And I'm just embarrassed beyond belief. And I'm just like, no, leave me alone. And he goes, hey, man, it's okay. Like, everyone has their vices. And I was like, I seriously am not on drugs. I'm training for a marathon. And I clearly don't know all the steps to like keeping lactic acid out of my body. He's like, let me drive you home. But I bring this up, and he did. I refused him multiple times, and then he finally was like, come on, man. And he was nice enough to drive me home. And I spent a really long time in a cold bath and like getting my body back. But like I bring that up because as embarrassing as that was, I still had the intention of doing something good. Pushing myself and doing something good for my body, even though it went completely wrong and it was an embarrassing moment in my life. I would just say like my thought is if you're really going after it, even if you feel ridiculous or you don't feel like I wasn't a runner. I don't consider myself a runner. But if that's an activity that could, help me become more healthy, why would I ever like feel bad about it?
Right.
I'm embarrassed, but I made it through, and I eventually started looking up like, oh, well, how can I approach this in a better way, a smarter way that is better for my body? And we're all going to go through those different phases or different things that we're learning about, and we're not going to feel like we're a person who goes to the gym or we're a person who works out or a person who doesn't drink or a person who can't fast. Go through those thresholds. It might be embarrassing in the beginning. You might be like on the verge of death, but there are benefits and takeaways even to simply just being in a situation that's embarrassing and making it through and realizing like, oh, okay, well, if I can get through that and I'm not dead, what were the takeaways? And then move forward with that new information and just improve your life.
If at first you don't succeed, try again.
That's it.